Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending today's session. This is a follow-up to one of the events the Denver Data Storytellers hosted earlier this year for our DataViz Tools Fair, where we just kind of briefly covered a variety of tools. And now we're doing a series of deeper dives into some of those tools that were presented during that meeting. So welcome. Today we'll be focused on Power BI. Just a quick about us for the Denver Data Storytellers. My name is Pat Hotovy. I'm one of the members of the organizing team for the Denver Data Storytellers, along with Paul, David, some other people on this call. Just quick about me. I am newly just started a new job, so I'm a data and analytics consultant for a company called Cleartelligence. Very excited to be starting something different and kind of getting to do both analytics and data viz for a variety of customers. And then about our group, basically we're a community of individuals that are passionate about data and telling stories with data. We try to be inclusive, try to welcome all members, all varieties of experience, and we host several events. We have ongoing happy hours, or I think we're switching to twice or every 2 months. We have a book club and we host presentations like this, but always looking for more ideas and more people to help. If anyone's interested in joining the organizing team, we're always looking for new members. And if you're not already on them, make sure to sign up for our email newsletter and our Slack channel. And then the reason you guys are all here, today's speaker is David Napoli. David is one of the few people I know that dives into tools and understands them at a level even deeper than what I do. That's one thing I really enjoy doing, but David is night and day where I would like to be. So it's very impressive just to see what he knows, and he's an excellent presenter. So I think you guys will be very excited or very entertained with his presentation. So David, I will hand it over to you to take over.
All right. Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you, Paul. Certainly appreciate having everyone taking time out of their day to follow me along on this little analytics journey we're going to be taking here today, and also appreciate everyone's patience as I had an unfortunate cycling crash a little over a month ago at this point, and I've been healing up when I was going to last present this. And you'll see how that cycling piece kind of ties into what we're going to be talking about today. So not as timely as it would have been, but hopefully it's still an enjoyable data analytics and visualization kind of journey we'll be taking here today to show you some of the capabilities within Power BI. So with that, I'm going to get started. And I will mention up front, as I kind of will share my screen now, that if you happen to have Power BI in some way, shape, or form, Power BI via the web, or you've downloaded the Power BI desktop, you can actually follow along with me today, because we'll be doing this all from scratch. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't gone through these steps before. I have those all tracked, but you should be able to follow along if you'd like, or as mentioned, this is going to be recorded, so you can always hop back to that recording and follow along as well. So won't be kind of stopping along to make sure everyone's kind of on tap. I will want to keep this moving and make sure we show those capabilities, but you'll have those resources as well. But I'll be stepping through this. As you see here, I'm starting from a blank Power BI report. So what are we going to be reporting on today? As I said, it's related to cycling. So since I was supposed to do this last month, which would have been smack dab in the middle of the Tour de France, that's the data we're going to be using here today. So the bad thing is, obviously, the Tour de France is over. The World Championships, which were called the Super Worlds this year, because they had every cycling event except for cyclocross, competed and completed just a week ago, and we had the Volta a España in about a week and a half. So cycling is still timely. But the good thing about this is, since that the Tour de France just ended, the data now includes this year's version as well, where if we had done it last month, we wouldn't have had the current one. So I will share this site for anyone that wants to follow along, and you can visit this. I will put this in chat here in a second. And wants to visit this. And the data that we're going to be using, I will point out, they both have the men's and women's data in here now. So the Tour de France Femme avec Swift, that data is now presentable within it, but we'll focus just on the men's today because unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, it does have a longer history. Hopefully the women's will now have such a long history going forward from this point. I'm certainly glad they've rekindled that fire and I'm going forward with it. So once you're on that site, we'll see that there is a nice little URL that has the Tour de France riders data in a CSV. We're going to just copy it, and that's what we're going to utilize to be able to pull into Power BI. We can grab it right from the web, pull it right in, and we'll start our visualization journey from there. So for those that want to follow along, grab that URL. Once you're in Power BI, you can do that get data. You're going to get it from the web. You can leave it at basic, just paste in that URL. You can just copy from that site. May take a second or so to load up. And you'll be presented now with, this is kind of the lead into one of the capabilities of Power BI. Side note, what you're going to see here is also available within Excel if you're not familiar with it. Get familiar with it. Hence why I wanted to show this. We're going to hit transform data. More than likely, it's going to open up on my first window, so I will pop it over. And what you see here is Power Query. And this is the ETL or extract, transform, load capability within Power BI. Again, as I mentioned, it's also in Excel. But this is a way now to create repeatable processes of steps as you manipulate, transform, cleanse the data environment. And we can be able to see some of the data elements that are available within this data set. So I'll just do a quick little scroll as we kind of observe. Yep, we have rider names, we have their rank, what number they happen to be, we have the team, how long they were riding for that Tour de France, the gap between the leader and their position. So don't worry about the BMP. We're not going to be utilizing those columns, but there's a data dictionary on the site if you want to dive into it. We have our year, we have a distance in kilometers, number of stages, we have total seconds, as well as the gap in seconds, and then the result type, which often is going to be time. There are other where they did points, but time is going to be of importance here. So our first step, I'm going to scroll back for a second. We notice our first column doesn't even have a name. That's certainly a faux pas from a data standpoint. How can you refer to a column when it doesn't have a name? So we'll just double click on that. We'll call this our ID column. This is essentially our unique numbering. I could just type in ID, hit enter. And then thinking ahead, because I will hop back to that website for a second. There's this nice little visual that they created that showed total distance versus, and I will take umbrage on the phrasing here. It says winter average pace. Pace is a running term, not a cycling term. So this would be winter average speed. So we will be rephrasing that when we recreate this visual. But since we're going to be focusing on trying to create this eventually, well, we probably want hours. And if you recall, when we were going through the data, it said total seconds. So why don't we add that to that data? So I'll hop back into Power Query. And now we can also add columns to our data. You'll notice up in the menu, we have this nice little add column capability. And we're going to add a custom column. We can give that a name. Obviously, besides something that just says custom, I'm going to call this total hours. And I'll zoom in on this in a second just so everyone can see it after I type it. And this is going to be our total seconds which we could just start typing. And once you see it highlighted, I could just hit tab to fill it in. And I need to convert seconds to hours. So I will divide that. You could just divide it by 3,600 and be done with it. I'll just show it in the steps, seconds to minutes, times another 60 minutes to hours. Here's your 3,600, just to explain that out. Notice no syntax errors have been detected. I'll just zoom that in so you can see that. Very straightforward to be able to add a column to our data. I'll hit OK. And you'll see all of a sudden now within our data, we have our column total hours already set up for us. And if next year you wanted to come around to this, pull in this data, it would automatically update. So it's pointing right to that file. You could just hit refresh from our data. It would pull that in, and any additional transformations we make, we'll be coming back to this. Don't worry, would all be there, all the steps, very repeatable, editable, be able to verify the steps are working as you expect. All right, so that's our initial foray into Power Query. Again, we'll be coming back. Let's go back to our home menu, and we're going to close and apply this so we can essentially now load this within our data. You can see that it's loading it to our model. It's loaded the rows, and now we have that data within our data pane, and there's even our total hours that we added. So that's all there. All right, one aspect that you can also do with data, you can filter it. And the data for the Tour de France around World War I and prior, it's not the cleanest. So what we're going to do up front is essentially filter out certain years of the data so we don't see the uncleanliness of the data that they're scraping and pulling in from the Tour de France site. So we have this filter section. I'm just going to expand that. And as we create these visuals, we can just filter on the specific page or across all of them, which is what we want to do in this case. So we'll do the filters on all of our pages, and we're going to pull in the year. We'll add that. And we want this to be greater than or equal to 1919. And we can apply that. Now, obviously, it's not going to do anything right up front. There's no visual there yet, but as we add it, you'll see that those years and prior are eliminated from the data. And that little wonkiness we see within the data, we won't have to deal with.
Hey, David.
Let's start. Yep.
There's a question in the chat from Regina. She says, hello, is there a reason that a calculated column was created and not DAX to create total hours? I'm not sure I know what DAX is. Maybe you do. If not,
yep. Data analysis expression, and it's because I'm going to be showing DAX later. So I was already in Power Query to transform it, so might as well show one of the capabilities of it right then and there. DAX comes later. There are always multiple ways to handle data transformations and manipulations within this. But also, I would say, yeah, sweet. I want to make sure that I do have the number of hours for every single writer. And you'll see what I mean once I start getting into DAX, because you can aggregate at different levels with a DAX measure versus having it as a column. But yep, but simply I was there, show the capability. We'll be getting to DAX later. All right. So now let's start building out our first visual just so we can start getting a little bit familiar with our data here. And we're going to first add a stacked column chart. We're going to start looking at essentially how many teams there were per year, what are the teams, and then who is on the teams. And we'll be able to do that all within one visual. So I just clicked on the stacked column chart. I'm going to resize this to take up about roughly half the space. Do that. Should be reasonable enough. And for our x-axis, I will add the year. It's not going to show anything yet. I need to tell the data. This time I'm going to add the team to our y-axis, but I don't want the count of teams because obviously there's multiple writers on a team. I just want the number of teams per year, so I need to hit the drop down and change that to count distinct. That's much better. And instead of saying count of team, let me rename that just to show that capability. I'm going to rename for this visual. I'll call this number of teams. A little cleaner than just showing count of teams there. Notice our axis range is pretty wide here. I'll just show this capability. We can do this with the other charts if you want, but just to save a little bit of time, I will demonstrate it once. Let's go to our format visual. And I'm going to change our x-axis range that you see here, set to automatic. I'm going to change the minimum. Let's make this 1915. And I'll make the max 2025. You'll notice that narrows it out, makes it a little cleaner. We don't see that extra space off to the side. Right. Okay, there's our first step. Now we have the number of teams, but what are the teams? And then who is on the teams? So now we're going to add two tables to our visual. Oops, sorry about that. Make sure I click outside of that. Forgot to do that. Let's add our first table. I will resize this somewhere around half. Good enough for right now. Add our second table. Now to our first table, I'm going to add now the teams. Okay, here's all of our teams. And for our second table, I'll select that. This is where our writers go. Okay, so obviously right now it's showing everything, but I can select a year and it will tell me, okay, here are the teams that rode that year and all the writers. Now, what if I was interested in who rode this year for, I'm going to pick Jumbo Visma. For those that are familiar with the Tour de France, then you might know why. But notice if I select on that, it now selects just the team across, well, whatever years they happen to ride for that. But let's say I wanted a specific year for a specific team. How do I do that? So I'm going to pick a different year this time. So let's say I pick 2020. I still want Jumbo Visma. So now I'm going to do Windows speak. I'm on a Windows machine, so I'm holding down the Control key while I select the team. Now it will filter to the year and the team and tell me the writers that finished that year. So for example, I'll just pick out this current year. I'll pick Jumbo Visma again. And for those that are familiar, you might be saying, hey, where is Wout van Aert on the Jumbo Visma list? Well, the good thing is he actually left a couple days early because his wife gave birth to their first child. So hence why he isn't on this list, but just to call that out. Nice way to start exploring, visually exploring the data within Power BI. Very straightforward and simple. Okay, and then the last step, what you should always do for your visualizations, give it a name. Don't just leave it as page 1. Double click on that, and we'll call this number of teams. And of course, you can unselect if you want to get it back all to where you were. All right, so let's do a little further exploring now. We did our first visual just to get a little familiar, but now let's do our visuals with the intent on, let's make sure the data that we have here, see if there's any concerns or issues that we have with it. All right, so we're going to create a new sheet, so a new page. You just hit the little plus to follow up on that. We'll add our stacked column chart again. I'm going to fill the entire workspace for this one. So you can just click and drag it, make it nice and big. Also helps when you're presenting when it's nice and big. And this time I want to look at the number of writers that finished by year. So again, we will take our year, add that to our x-axis. At this time, I'm going to take the ID column that we created. I'm going to put that on the y-axis. Since that ID has for every row, that'll be our count of our writers for each of these years. And they're only listed if they finished. And then just as we did before, I'll rename it for this visual. I'll call this number of writers finished. And I will pause there. We see any issues with the data? Put it in chat. If you like to, come off mute. There's two that I noticed. Any thoughts? Yep, okay, there's the one. Thank you, Paul. World War II. We're missing. And obviously the ends, we already excluded the earlier than 1919. So, but there's one other issue that I see. Anyone happen to notice that one? So we can certainly explain the one. Yeah, well, Wilfred, just slightly off on the year, but yeah, you essentially got it. In this case, it happens to be 1966. This is showing only 3 finishers. Yeah, that's not the case. So this is an instance of from where they sourced the data, there was an issue in it. So I'm bringing this up as you can use the visual power within Power BI to be able to start pulling out any data issues and concerns that you see here. So if I were to want to present this fully, I probably need to cleanse that 1966 data and essentially scrape it from somewhere else. That's a whole nother webinar we can go into and how to pull that and scrape that data in, which you can do within Power BI. That data does exist as well. And again, just as before, I'd probably change the axis here. And again, for our visuals, always give your sheet a name. I'll call this our number of writers finish. But that's an approach you utilize to start validating the data. It wouldn't obviously stop here. I'm going to do so just for our timeliness to move on to some other topics. But that is how you would want to start evaluating our data. So yeah, something is amiss there. And I haven't checked. I got to look into the Tour de France site and see if I look at the 1966 data, if it's only showing 3 writers on that first page instead of all of them. I haven't followed up on that. But obviously an issue. All right, so let's go start diving in a little bit further here. We've covered our data issues on this. Now, we want to dive in a little bit further. We want to see the wins by team and by writer. So, which writers won? How many times did they win? This is now, and the point I'm bringing this up is generally when you start visualizing things, speaking more broadly here, you have to have an understanding of the business. So if I just dove in and started visualizing who won each year of the Tour de France, is there any issue with that? See if anyone knows. Well, no, there's one specific factor I'm looking at. For example, I'm going to ask this. Who? Yeah, there we go. Nailed it. Thank you, Cynthia. So the example I was going to give up and I was going to ask who won the Tour de France in the year 2000. The correct answer is no one. There is no winner. So if I pulled the data from the Tour de France site, I would have no one ranked number one. It starts with 2. And you notice there was a rank column in there. So if I started going off by wins and looking for rank equals 1, I'm missing. I have a whole bunch of years missing. So exactly, all of Lance's 7 wins from 1999 to 2005 are out the window from the Tour de France's perspective, which is where this data was sourced. That's where I'm talking about knowing the business. So given that, as we proceed here, we have to account for that. I need to, if I'm going to look at who's the top writer, it's not going to be just where rank equals 1. I got to find the minimum rank by year. Okay, so that's what I was kind of thinking ahead. So we're going to hop back into Power Query, and I'm going to show you the capability of being able to take that data and on the fly create year by year what's the minimum rank that we see, and be able to pull that back into the data and then flag, okay, here's your top writer each year. All right, so it gives that layout. So let's start proceeding. I'll create our sheet that we're going to utilize to build the visual off of eventually. But what we really need to dive in is back to Power Query now and show some of the additional capabilities there. So up on our home menu, transform data is where Power Query lives. By the way, this is the aside thing in Excel. If you're not familiar with it, Power Query is called Get and Transform. Don't ask me why they didn't call it the same name, but yeah, whatever. It's the same capabilities that are there. And now we need to create essentially our query. If you're familiar with SQL, think of it as like a subquery, or CTE is essentially what we're doing here. And we're going to pull that back in to be able to add additional data to it. So let's take our original query and right click on it. And I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to rename it just so we know exactly what this is. I'm going to double click. I'm going to get rid of that under that parenthetical 2. I'll just call this underscore min rank. If I could spell right, it would help. And now you're going to see how quick and dirty this is. Even quicker than you could do in Excel. We have this nice little group by capability within Power Query. I will hit that. And what I want to do is I want to group by the year. My new column is going to be my minimum count. So I'll just call this, my minimum rank. I'll call this min rank. And I want the min of my rank. I'll zoom in on that just for a second so everyone can see. Taking my year, I'm going to create my new column of min rank. So group by year, I want the minimum rank for each year. Hit OK, and voila, done. Eliminates all the other columns. All I have is my year and my rank. And lo and behold, there's all the 2s I spoke about. See, pays them to follow cycling a little bit when you're dealing with cycling data. All right, now we're going to take these additional steps, so we'll be able to leverage this table and start building out within here the additional fields that we can leverage to be able to get the true counts of who won, and leverage this from a top writer perspective, because if you recall, this is labeled our winner average pace. So I need to identify who's the top writer and what their pace, speed was. So this is where this is going to come into play. All right, so now, once you have the Tour de France rider's history, our original query selected, we're going to merge queries. Again, up in the home menu. Up on top should be your Tour de France rider's history. There's obviously only one other query. I'm not sure why it doesn't just default to showing the second one when you only have 2, but whatever. Pretty easy to select it anyway. Now you need to tell it which one you're going to merge on again, I'm not sure why Microsoft is deciding to rename things that have been called things in SQL for almost 50 years. Just call this a join and tell what field you're joining on. I'm joining on year by year. I mean, they even put it here, join kind. Just call it a join up front. That's end of soapbox for right now. All right, we can leave it as a left outer join. It's technically a join. We have the year in both, but you can see we have every single row is matched. We're perfect on that. We hit OK. It will now put in that column as a table initially. I'm going to expand it. So it's a little kind of, it looks like arrows pointing to the opposite direction. I only need the min rank. I already have the year in the table. So I'm going to deselect the year. I don't need the original, essentially table name as a prefix. Get rid of that. I only need it to say min rank. Hit OK. There's my minimum rank I could have in there. So now I have it all on the table. I could just determine, is this right, or are they the minimum based on, does their rank equal the minimum for that year? That will tell me who the top writer is now. Right. Now we're going to build a little bit on this. Well, I want to create essentially a flag that's the min rank flag. Just tells me 1 or 0. Is it the minimum one or not? Yeah, I could do a creation on the fly. Just shows additional capability that I'm doing here within a custom column. So let's go ahead and do that. Go back to my add column. This time I'm going to add a conditional column. Again, I'm doing this to show capability here. Let's call this min rank flag. And I want this if the rank equals, I need to change this to a column. It equals the min rank. So is that writer the top writer? Give it a 1, else a 0. Again, yes, there are other ways to do this. I'm showing capability within here. Let's hit OK. And voila, now I could filter it down to whom that top writer is. So remember that visual. We needed the top writer by year. That just allows me to do this. Thinking ahead of how we can do these capabilities here. All right, at this point, I don't really need the min rank column anymore. This is all I care about. This is another capability within Power Query, is if you don't need a column and if you used it, it will still maintain its use, but I don't need to see it from a reporting perspective. So I'm going to right click on that column and say remove. And notice my min rank flag still works. It still performs the step prior. But now when I pull in that data, I don't have to worry about seeing that field, nor does it take up kind of space within this. All right, one other item. These are ones and zeros.
Quick question on that
Yep.
one. What happens if you needed to change the logic on that min rank?
So that's the other good thing about Power Query, is all the steps are repeatable and editable. So if I needed to change it, you notice all these little cogs that you see here? I could just click on that. I can edit the logic right there. So very straightforward to be able to change any of the steps. I can reorder them even if I need be. I can drag these around and reorder. So very flexible in that capability and repeatable fashions for it. And it's somewhat self-documenting too, based on, you could see all the applied steps. All right. Okay, since we're there, I'm going to go back to my next step. Not absolutely necessary, but again, to show capabilities, I can change data types. So I'm going to change the data type for a min rank flag. It's just a 1 or a 0. Might as well make it a whole number. And my total hours as well, these are decimal numbers. Let's do that as well. Let's change that to a decimal number. Doesn't change anything, but it will from a formatting perspective down the road. All right. All right, one other item we're going to do now is we're going to create a flag for the winners. This is another visual we could create. Just to show this one, I'm going to create a custom column again. I will call this our winner flag. You'll see what I'm doing here in a moment. I could do this in the conditional. I'm showing capabilities here because there's a point I want to make typing it out this way. That's the reason why, because you'll see I'm doing an if statement again, but there's a reason why I'm doing it this way versus the conditional column. So if my min rank flag, if that is 1 and the rank is 1, so that means they were the top writer and they truly won it, then it's a 1, else a 0. All right. Why did I do it like this? Well, it's to point out in Power Query if statements are case sensitive. If I type this with a capital if, capital I, capital F, it won't work. It has to be lowercase, the way that I've phrased it here. That's why I did this. Wanted to show that little nuance within Power Query. So yeah, you could do it the conditional format way, just so you have that awareness. You'll see in most instances, obviously, these will both be 1s. But for example, if I looked at the year 2000, I would have a 1 in the min rank. And it's going to have a 0 next to the winner because they were not a winner. Remember, we're trying to build a visual of who won each year and who was that writer. I need this. All right, now we're done with our transformations. Let's hop back in. Go to our home, close and apply. And you'll see we now have our additional columns that we added. There's our winner flag. There's our min rank flag. We can start building out the visual. Okay, we're going to create 2 stacked bar charts this time, right side by side. Okay, so I'll add 1. And we'll resize that. Oops. I want to resize. Thank you. And create another one right next to it. And I could resize these to be exact. I'm not going to worry about that. Let's select our first one. Y-axis. I want the team, which teams won, and then I want which writers. My x-axis, there's our winner flag. That's where it goes in. I don't want count this time. I want our sum of this, which I think I forgot to change that field, didn't I? Yep, I did. So go back to your transform data. Forgot that last step. See, this is why it's good to have repeating on this. Change your winner flag. Remember how I did for the min rank flag? I forgot to do it for this one. That should be a whole number as well. So it's always easy to go back and edit steps kind of on the fly. And you'll notice now I can sum it. So now this tells me how many times each team won. Yes, way back in the day, they didn't really have teams, so it's just showing the country that the writer was from. That's why you see France showing up so many times. Team Sky, for those that are in cycling lore and know their dominance for a number of years, they're also called Sky Pro Cycling are there. Let's go further. We have our teams. Let's pick our second visual. This time we're going to have for our y-axis, instead of the team, it is now the writer. And the x-axis is going to be the same again. Or some. And of course, I could rename the sum of winner flag, just call it number of wins. Saving time on here. And now I could pick, for example, if those that really know their American cycling history, Greg LeMond, the first and, well, now technically only American to win the Tour de France. I could select him and see which teams he was on. And I could also pick, for example, Bernard Hinault, who one of those that have won 5. Look at that one. Yeah. I wonder what happened between Hinault and Le Mans that year. For those that know their cycling history, you'll certainly know that one. Yes, they were on the same team. And Bernard Hinault said, hey, this is a little side note on this one. For Bernard Hinault to win his 5th, he said to Greg LeMond, let me win this one, and next year I will help you win yours. And then reneged on that the following year. While they're on the same team, he kept attacking him. And Greg LeMond still won. Interesting little history. But great way, I could select team. It will tell me who won it. Or I could select, obviously, the writer. And it'll tell me which teams they were on. All right, so let's rename that sheet. We'll call this our number of wins. Nice little fun exercise there. As I said, this is how we know the data. And you can see how we can create variables, essentially fields we need on the fly with Power Query. All right, now we're at the big step, and you can pull the DAX out of your pocket. It's going to be coming up on this step. We're going to recreate this for the most part. There's little nuances that are different, but essentially you're going to see this replicated. We can build this within Power Query. Even including this little highlighting, kind of. I'll explain as we go into it. Right? So let's create our new sheet if you haven't already. And this time we're going to add a line chart. Kind of odd, huh? That we're building a dot plot from a line chart. You'll see. So not exactly intuitive. You might have thought scatter plot would be it. Not quite. Again, we can resize it so it fills up our entire workspace. Makes it nice and easy to see. Now what we need to do is dive into DAX. So what we need here is I want total distance, and yeah, since I'm a stupid American, we're going to do it in miles and miles per hour. Yes, I do know metric. I was actually an engineer background, so I'm actually more comfortable in metric. But again, this is to have a little bit of fun and maybe make it a little relatable here. So yeah, we need to create and convert our distance from kilometers to miles. And we remember we added our hours, so we have kilometers and hours. I could get kilometers per hour. We're going to create miles per hour. But I want to, on the fly, be able to filter our data. This is where the measure is going to come into place. Where I want to select, okay, I'm going to create the distance that the top writer did and the speed that the top writer rode. That's where DAX comes into play. So I'm going to just copy and paste this into chat if you want to follow along on this to create the total distance. And I'll explain this a little bit. We're going to create a new measure right from our home menu. And up comes, just like you would see in Excel, your kind of your formula bar, and you can paste in what I just put in there. All right, DAX itself could be an entire class. And in fact, it is a day and a half in the Power BI course that I teach. So covering it in just a minute is going to barely scratch the surface, but you'll see some similarities to Excel formulas. There's our sums. You'll see some like calculate, which is completely new. But essentially what the calculate function does is allows it to, well, evaluate the expression, applying a filter to the data. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see these steps. So I'm filtering my data to the minimum rank of 1. So that top righter, right? I'll zoom back in over here. And notice what I'm doing is I'm summing essentially the distance and I'm converting it to miles. That's what that 1.60 blah, blah, blah does. It just converts kilometers to miles. And I also have an error check here because there are some issues with the data where the distance shows up as 0, where I just say, hey, if it's 0 blank, don't try to start dividing out. Otherwise, you get these really weird things. Just blank it out. And notice, and now it lists within our data, we get a nice little calculator that shows it's a measure. This will calculate on the fly at the level of aggregation that you pull it in. In this case, we're going to be looking at it by year. So it'll look at it by year, filter to the top righter, and tell what's the distance they rode. Let's format it while we're there. So we have a format. So let's change our number. Let's make this decimal with a comma. I could have made it a whole number, but just in case you wanted to do that, so apply the comma format to it. And I'm actually going to put it to 0 decimals. So yes, I could have made it a whole number, but in case you wanted to play around with it and change it, or if there was a case where they updated the data so that it had it to that level of precision, it could handle it. All right, we have our distance. Now let's do our top speed. We'll also do that in DAX. Get ready, here comes the next formula. So I'll create another measure, same process we just went through. My top speed, you'll see it's the same type of approach. I'm looking, well, now if the total hours is 0, just blank it. Otherwise, take my total distance measure I just created. So in DAX, you can leverage not just the fields in your data, but the measures you create. And I'll divide that by the number of hours that my top ranked rider rode. So there's my miles, there's my hours. I'll get my miles per hour. And again, let's format it. Decimal. This time I will leave a decimal, just 1 is sufficient. We have our line chart. Now we could start building it. And then we'll show you how to convert it to a dot plot. X-axis, that's our year. Our Y-axis is going to be our distance, the measure we created. Our secondary Y-axis is our top average speed we created. Okay, not looking quite like what we need. Yes, I would change the axis range. Remember how we did that initially? I'm going to skip that step just for right now. But now let's format this visual. Let's change a few things. Our markers, let's turn that on for these. Let's get back into that. Why is that not letting me do that? All right. There we go. Okay. Starting to look a little closer. Let's go to our lines. And look at our stroke width. Let's turn that all the way down. Dot plot. Okay, so that's your little trick of leveraging the line chart to create a dot plot. You're just essentially turning the lines to nothing to be able to do that. So a little trick within Power BI to be able to handle that. Could do some other things I will show you. So we have that. Let's change the fonts on some of these. The numbers are a little small. You can always make these bigger if you'd like on these. So our x-axis, we could go to our values. Our font size, I'll bump that up a little bit. Just to show you some of these capabilities to make it a little bit more readable. I can do the same thing for these as well. You can go to the y-axis, go to your values, change that. And if you want to change the size of the title, you can do that as well on those and make even the labels bigger or smaller, change the font as well. So we're pretty close to our visual. Obviously, we don't have this, the World War I, we kind of excluded that data, but let's see if we could do a little bit of the highlighting here. This is where that piece I alluded to, I'm going to explain. Can't quite get it, but you can in one way. What you can do, two approaches. If I had not used the secondary axis in this case, you could do a combo chart and have one as a line, one as a bar, and then create the bar for the specific year range. Have that highlighted and you'd be done. However, we're using both axes already. So in order to do this highlighting, this is where the further analysis comes in, where we can add constant lines, which is the vertical lines to do our call out. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to add the lines for World War II. So under the add further analyses, which used to be called the analytics panel, we're going to add a line, hit the little pencil to give it a name. I will call this World War II. Color of this, just because I will pick orange, you can pick whatever color you want. Again, the transparency, you can pick whatever you want on this. I'll just do 20% for now. The style I want is solid. I want that in front, and I need to give it a value. In this case, it starts in 1940. And there it is. And this one, I want the data label on. I will expand this. The style I want is the name. There's my World War II. Let's put it as the same color. And now I can repeat again for my other edge, where did World War II span? So let's add another line. I will call this World War II as well. Let's put 1946 in this time for the value. I'll give it the orange again. 20. Solid. And there we have it. Essentially replicated that visual that you saw originally, all within Power BI. And our last step, we can obviously give this sheet a name. We'll call this our Tour de France. Average speed, not pace, versus distance. All right, I will stop there.
David, I saw a quick question. Can this be exported to Illustrator for fine tuning?
Yes, you can. You can save it as images. So like a PNG, for example, and then kind of have that at that point. see if there's other questions, comments.
I had one really quick.
Yep.
David, can you remind us the cost of using Power BI?
Good question. All right. So this one has definitely layers to it. So the version that you're seeing here that I'm utilizing today is free. So you can create visuals all you want via this method. Now we get into the little more complex arena is, okay, I created this visual, I want to share it. All right. Here are some of the answers to this. You either have to, at that point, buy a Power BI Pro license. There's dollars now obviously associated with it. Or you could, here's my mouse, thank you. Publish it, which then goes to your personal workspace, which if you tried to share will then say, oh, you need a Power BI Pro license. But you could then go file and essentially export as an embed code, a URL, which if you happen to have a site somewhere that you can post it at, now you can host it. So this is the long way of saying, why the heck is Microsoft not doing what Tableau has and have a version of Tableau public? I don't know. They need to, period. Here's soapbox moment number 2 for me today. They don't make it very easy to be able to share things. But if you have a place that can host something, yep, you could take the embed code and then people can interact, download, export it from there. But they're not making it very easy, user-friendly, especially for an individual who says, hey, I want to start exploring this. And for example, I want to have a portfolio that I can show prospective employers of this. It makes it a little more difficult for them to do that. Excellent question. You see how layered that one is. And I just barely touched on it because I didn't even touch on the whole Microsoft Fabric that's now on board. And that creates a whole nother half-hour discussion at the very least. All right, other comments, questions? Now, just to throw it out there, in case anyone's ever wondering, like what, well, number one, I can't do the distances they do, period. Day after day after day. I've done like 100-mile rides and such, but my average speed for those is like maybe here. So compared to right now, yeah, I'm like down here. Fun little share there. I am nowhere near their league. And I can even prove it too. So the, like, for example, when we looked at the Jumbo Visma, Sepkus, who's an American rider from Durango, is a ride literally from my house this way that I've done, that he's done. And he has almost half my time. So yeah, I'm an avid cyclist.
I was just going to say, yeah, no, thanks everyone for attending. I think we're at time anyway. So yeah, if you have any follow-ups, you can get a hold of us through like the Denver Data Storytellers communications. Yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed it. Seems like there's some great comments in the chat saying that it was very helpful. Yeah, thank you, David.
Awesome. Yeah,
it's always impressive. So
appreciate it. My pleasure. This is a fun one, as you see, a little certainly something close to my heart.
I guess
enjoyable
questions.
passions.
Paul, where will the recording be saved and accessed?
Yeah, we've got a YouTube channel. So once I wrap this, I'll process the MP4, put it up there, and then I'll send a follow-up through Meetup to everybody, and it'll include the link. I'll also include where you can sign up for the Denver Data Storytellers email list and Slack channel if you want to continue the conversation about any of this. Last thing I was going to mention, we've got a happy hour coming up. I believe it's October 4th. Is going to be our next sort of in-person social event. I think some of you all have been to our happy hours in the past. If not, they're based in Denver. So more than welcome for you to join.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great work. Thank you.
Thanks. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. This was great.
Absolutely. My pleasure.